Glenn is a former constitutional lawyer and a contributing editor at Salon. And in my opinion, he writes the absolutely best political blog on the internet. I mean, it's one that... In fact, I was asking him before we started this evening whether that's all he does is just write his blog all day. So I told him we have this picture that he's in this mental image that he sits in a penthouse apartment just sitting there writing his blog all day, you know, living the good life. He's the author of 2 New York Times best-selling books, How Would a Patriot Act and A Tragic Legacy. His 3rd book, Great American Hypocrites, was just released by Crown Books. The title of Glenn's talk tonight is The 2008 Candidates and Civil Liberties, A New Path or More of the Same. Please welcome Glenn Greenwald.
Good evening, and thanks for being here and coming in and listening, and thanks to Jacob for those very nice introductory remarks. I'm going to have to talk to Salon about that penthouse that you're envisioning me in, because I haven't quite had that arrangement yet with them, but I'll definitely pursue that. I'm really pleased to be here at this conference. I was really thrilled when I received the invitation and was able to accept it, and even more pleased once I saw the list of participants who are going to be here, which is really composed of so many, I think, of the most effective and passionate advocates of civil liberties and constitutional rights over the past 7 or 8 years. And it's really great to be part of a conference filled with so many writers and advocates whose work I really respect and admire. A couple weeks ago, I was reading some of the promotional materials talking about what this conference would be and reading some of the things that people were writing about online in anticipation of this conference. And what typically people would say is that they would refer to what they would call the ideologically disparate range of speakers, or the ideologically diverse group of people who were participating here, and they would say things like there's libertarians and classical libertarians on the right, and would list a few examples, to people who are liberals or on the left, and would list a few examples, and I'd typically be included in that latter group. And, you know, I think to some extent there's some truth in the fact that there's this ideological difference between libertarianism and liberals or people on the left. There's certainly some views that are different on important policy questions. But I think in a much more important and profound sense, those differences have really substantially diminished over the past 7 or 8 years as a result of the radicalism of our government, and in some cases have eroded almost completely. And it's interesting, if you look at the issues that define the political spectrum in the 1990s, where one fell on the political spectrum would be determined by things like your views on abortion or gay rights or gun control or affirmative action or welfare reform, sort of these hot-button domestic policy disputes. And it's certainly the case that many of those issues retain a lot of importance to many people, understandably so, but to a large extent, those issues have really receded into the background of our political culture over the last 7 years and have been replaced by issues such as, do you believe that the President of the United States has the power to act without limitations of any kind in all matters regarding foreign policy, national security, and war? Or do you believe the government should be spying on American citizens without warrants? Or do you believe the President can literally break the law in how he implements these policies? And should we be attacking and occupying other countries that aren't threatening to attack us and haven't attacked us in any way? And those really now are the issues that I think have reshaped the political spectrum in a very substantial way. What's interesting is, you know, sometimes on various political matters, factions that have fundamentally different views end up almost by happenstance on the same side of a political debate. That's where politics makes strange bedfellows comes from that idea that sometimes just coincidentally 2 very disparate groups just happen to end up for completely different reasons, taking completely different paths on the same side of an important political dispute. I don't think that with regard to all of those critical issues that have been at the forefront of our political debates and will continue to be, that that's the case for the convergence of opinion among liberals and libertarians. By which I mean, I don't think that it's the case that liberals or people on the left and libertarians have opposed the radicalism and these Bush policies of the last 7 years by accident, because there's different premises and rationale and beliefs that have coincidentally led those two groups to be on the same side of those issues. Quite the contrary. I think that to a large extent, and in some cases almost completely, there's a real identity of rationale and premises and beliefs on these fundamental questions, so that much of the time you can read a libertarian writer or a writer on the left who is opposing warrantless wiretapping or imperialistic foreign policy or torture or detention of individuals without due process. And you could read their article, and if you weren't aware of the ideological affiliation of the writer, you would have no idea whether they're a libertarian or a leftist or a liberal from the 1990s, because so many of the premises are shared between those two factions. And I think that's really engendering a substantial, an important political realignment, the effects of which we're only starting to see right now. I'll just highlight a little anecdote from the last 48 hours that I think illustrates that realignment pretty vividly. I was at the University of Florida yesterday for a conference of educators, and it's an annual conference that's held there, and these professors of education come in order to hear people speak on civil liberties and constitutional questions and some of the pending debates of the day. And it's my third consecutive year that I've attended, and the last 2 years, one of the other speakers was Congressman Bob Barr. He wasn't there this year, but he was there last year and the year before. And I was talking to the conference director about the fact that I was coming here after being there, and we had a discussion about the relationship between people on the left and libertarians. And the story that she told me was this. She said, yeah, last year when Congressman Barr was at this conference giving a seminar, one of the professors who was there asked a question afterwards, and the question was, with regard to all these issues that you're talking about, civil liberties, constitutional rights, the assault on our basic political values, who would you identify as a office holder in Washington, a prominent office holder, who you think is particularly admirable in terms of their commitment to our constitutional liberties? And without thinking, without any time going by, he immediately singled out Russ Feingold and heaped all of this lavish praise on Senator Feingold for being so stalwart in opposing the Patriot Act back in 2001 when no one else in the Senate was willing to do so, and continuing throughout all these years to be a real steady and opponent, even without there being political benefits, to so much of the Bush policies that have assaulted our civil liberties. And after he sung the praises of Russ Feingold, the person followed up and said, well, what about somebody in your own party, in the Republican Party? Obviously, there's people like Ron Paul, but they're kind of sort of stigmatized and treated as pariahs by the party leadership. Who would you say in the party leadership, a prominent national Republican, would be worthy of similar praise with regard to their commitment to these issues? And there was this dead silence for about 30 seconds, and he would start and stop and start and stop, trying to find some name that he could offer up. And finally, in a sort of half-hearted way, he said, well, I guess I would say Jim Gilmore, who was the one-time governor of Virginia for 4 years, and no disrespect to him, but is not exactly a figure of great national prominence and influence within the national Republican Party. And I just found that anecdote so striking because to a 1990s liberal, Bob Barr was essentially the equivalent of, I guess you could say Satan. He was really, really the embodiment of everything that liberals recoiled from in horror and revulsion. And that reaction was quite mutual. Bob Barr was one of the great crusaders and warriors against liberalism in the 1990s, and yet here he is just a few years later when asked to identify a national political figure who he finds particularly worthy of commendation and respect on the issues, not that are obscure, but to which he's devoting the bulk of his political energies. And he identifies one of the most putatively liberal members of the United States Senate as being so admirable in that regard, and struggles to find somebody within the Republican Party of national significance, meaning someone accepted by the party hierarchy, who is similarly worthy of respect. And I think that's illustrative of a very profound